Welcome to Just Relationships, the show that offers you concrete ways to make your relationships better. Whether it's your boss, your spouse, your children, or your friends, the quality of your relationships in life directly affects how you feel about yourself and the success you achieve. Your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer, a psychotherapist, telecoach, author, and seminar leader, will interview top experts to help you learn to manage this essential part of your life. And now, here's your host, Dr. Duffy Spencer.
Greetings to you. Do you like yourself? Do you have compassion for yourself? Did you know that self-compassion is the number one way we can heal ourselves? And yet, self-compassion is so misunderstood and so elusive by so many people. And I'm very happy to have as my guest Tim Desmond, who is a psychotherapist, author, and a student of Thich Nhat Hanh, who is a Zen master. So, Tim, welcome.
Thank you.
Wow. So would you agree that self-compassion is the elixir for healing?
I guess you can call it a lot of different things. The way that I've been thinking about it lately is just to say that there's a way of relating to ourselves. There's a way of relating to what's beautiful in our lives and what's painful in our lives that allows for healing and greater happiness and freedom to be possible. And that way of relating to ourselves, some people might call mindfulness, some people might call compassion or resilience or kind of whatever you want to call it. But for me, one of the essential features of this is learning how to relate to everything in my life, and especially what's hard in my life, learning how to relate to that with compassion.
And everyone, I didn't think, I'm so excited about having you, Tim Desmond, the author of the Self-Compassion Skills Workbook. And you've also written a book on self-compassion itself. Yes, self-compassion in psychotherapy. Yeah. Okay, so you are an expert on self-compassion, which I think is so necessary. So when you talk about a way of relating to ourselves, and because I was going to ask you what is the connection between self-compassion and mindfulness. We hear the term mindfulness so often these days. It's kind of like the new power word, the new buzzword. And I just want to tell you that I have been teaching self-esteem at Nassau Community College literally for decades. Yeah. And my students will come in and they will be so happy to be there. And, okay, self-love, yes, I'll go for that. Let me learn this. And then when I ask them to accept themselves, oh, no way. I don't want to accept myself. Of course, I ask why. And they say, well, because if I accept myself, essentially, I'm complacent.
Yeah, I feel like believing that we're unacceptable is probably the worst possible motivation to change. Mm-hmm. It's going to lead so deep down in that belief structure. If you feel like the only way or the best way to sort of be motivated to improve yourself is to believe that you're not currently good enough, right? Then you have this sort of platonic ideal of what an acceptable person would be, and you're basically resigning yourself to believe that you're not acceptable, that you're not worthy of love until you achieve an ideal that you likely will not ever achieve.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And the reality is, as soon as we learn how to see that in this moment, to be able to see the beauty in yourself, to be able to see that you're already someone who's lovable. And as soon as we let that in, there's just a natural motivation for growth and change and learning that drives personal development. And it drives personal development because we're from a place of feeling kind of solid about ourselves. We're wanting to learn more about the world. And we're wanting to sort of deepen our connections and learn how to connect more deeply with people. And that becomes the driver. And it's not the driver of I'm trying to escape being worthless, or I'm trying to escape being inadequate, but I'm recognizing the beauty in myself, and I'm wanting to feel closer and more harmonious with, just the people in my life. And I want to learn more about that. And that's a motivator that leads to a lot more success in every part of our lives.
Tim Desmond, that is so beautifully put. You said it a lot better than I do in my classes. And, the whole idea of thinking that we are spurred on to greatness or able to improve by disapproving of ourselves is really, really fruitless. And as you say, it is the most unmotivational thing you can possibly do. So, Tim, what's your take on the difference between self-acceptance and self-compassion, and even you can throw in self-love or self-esteem?
Yeah, I think, I guess what I would say is I try not to get kind of caught up in semantics.
Yes.
Because people can use those words to mean different things.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing and that's one of the reasons why I try not to get even too attached to the word self-compassion, although I use that word a lot, because if what you mean by self-compassion is not something that's particularly healthy, then it's not a good thing. It's not something to cultivate. The way that I try to help people sort of get beyond getting caught up by words is just the idea that, okay, how do I want to relate to myself? What are the qualities? What are the values that I can manifest in the way that I relate to myself that's going to help me be the person that I want to be? And from my perspective, there are some distinctions that I like to put. And I use the word self-compassion for sort of to define the kind of what I view as the healthiest way of relating to ourselves, but you can call it something different. So Kristen Neff is a researcher at the University of Texas who studies self-compassion. And she likes to make a distinction between self-compassion and self-esteem. Now, my guess is when you teach self-esteem, you're probably not using the word in the way that she does. But the distinction that she makes is that there's a difference between thinking, sort of evaluating or judging ourselves as being good enough, and usually sort of better than other people. And she says when we do that, she'll call that self-esteem, but we don't necessarily need to use that word. But there's a difference between feeling like I need to be good or better than other people or better than average in order to have worth, versus recognizing that my value or my worth, it doesn't matter if I'm better, worse, or the same as anybody else at any particular quality. My value comes from just being a human being, and that I deserve kindness and love just because I'm a human being, not because I'm better than other people, not not because of the things that are good about me, but that my value comes from just being alive, just being a human. And so what she would say is the difference between the way that she calls it, self-compassion is when my value comes from I'm just a human being. Whereas often self-esteem, we think about my value comes from the ways that I'm good at things, the ways that I'm better. And the sort of fragility of that kind of evaluation is that I'm not always going to be better than other people. And nobody can be better than average in every way.
Right.
And so if my value comes only from the ways that I'm good, then it sort of feels a little more tenuous as opposed to recognizing that my value comes from just being a human being.
Right. So true. So I'll tell you, this is how I get around some philosophical belief in my classes. When you talk about the value of just being, you have worth because you are human. You have intrinsic self-worth and dignity just by virtue of being human. And many people don't necessarily believe that. They might believe in capital punishment. They might say, well, you acted badly, you committed horrific crimes, you don't have worth. How can you say that this person has worth? So I put it as I have made a philosophical decision to believe that every person, by virtue of being human, has inherent worth and dignity. I cannot prove this to you empirically, nor do I choose to engage in any kind of empirical debate about it. You may or may not choose to have this philosophical belief. And Tim, in all the years I've been teaching self-esteem building at Nassau Community College, I have never had one person publicly tell me, I don't want to choose that, or I don't believe everyone has inherent worth and dignity just by virtue of being human. So I'm just wondering your take on all this.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I believe that I think that we sometimes look for edge cases, we look for exceptions.
Yeah.
And for me, if someone's saying, well, I'm not sure that everyone has intrinsic worth, what about this kind of person or that kind of person? And the question usually those edge cases come from someone who's caused a lot of suffering.
Yes, very much so, right.
And yeah, and so then what I would say is, okay, well then maybe one thing that you might be able to relate to is having a really strong value that we want greater well-being and less suffering for ourselves, for the people in our lives, and ideally for people in the world. That we would prefer greater well-being and less suffering.
Right. For everyone, you're saying for everyone, and you're also saying as an individual for myself.
Yeah, and people might say, well, the well-being of my family is more important than others, and I'm not necessarily going to push back on that.
Mm-hmm.
What I would say is, but if you had the choice, if it were possible to have well-being for yourself and those you love, and well-being for other people that you don't know, would you prefer that?
Right.
And most people would say, yeah, I'd rather, and it sort of comes down to those moments when, and the way that I would phrase it is, so someone might say, it's not always possible. Sometimes it comes down to them versus you. And the way that I'd like to sort of rephrase that is there are definitely moments in which I don't know